Case 1 Tillie Klimek. April 1914, Cook County, Illinois. 4 years. People in Chicago's Little Poland neighborhood kept dying after eating at the same kitchen table. Husbands grew weak. Relatives collapsed. Neighbors complained of strange tastes in soup and were buried weeks later. One woman kept preparing the meals. She spoke about death before it arrived. She predicted funerals while men were still breathing. And when doctors finally found arsenic in her husband's body, they realized the meals had not been tradition. They had been procedure. In Chicago's Little Poland neighborhood, Tillie Klimek, later known as Tillie Klimek, lived among people who worked hard, worshipped faithfully, and shared food as a language of belonging. She was not striking, not celebrated, not feared. She was simply present. A squat woman with broken English and steady habits. She married, she cooked, she nursed the sick. Her home felt like any other narrow apartment in a dense immigrant block. She spoke about dreams, about omens, about what she felt would happen. Neighbors saw her as odd, but familiar. Men married her. Children ate at her table. And life continued, quietly, predictably, until predictability itself began to leave a trail of funerals. Behind the routine lived a pattern that did not rush. Husbands grew ill after long evenings of soup. Relatives weakened after candy shared across small arguments. Neighbors complained of strange tastes in meals and strange heaviness in their limbs. A dog that irritated Tillie died. Cousins collapsed after visiting. Yet no one could point to a single dramatic moment that demanded alarm. Poison does not bruise. It does not scream. It persuades the body to surrender slowly. Tillie leaned into that slowness. She spoke about death before it arrived. She joked about coffins. She knitted mourning clothes while men were still breathing. Her behavior did not hide. It normalized the idea that death was simply approaching on schedule. The turning point came not from a scream, but from survival. In 1921, her husband Joseph Klimek became gravely ill and was rushed to a hospital by relatives who refused to wait for dreams to become funerals. Doctors found arsenic in his body. He lived, and his survival did something death never could. It forced questions to stay open. When police arrived, Tillie did not retreat. She joked. She warned officers about their own future dinners. Exhumations followed. Bodies that had been buried with polite paperwork were opened again, and arsenic appeared where heart trouble had once been written. Frank Kupczyk, her third husband, became the crime that anchored her fate. He had fallen ill in their Winchester Street apartment. Tillie had announced his coming death to neighbors. She had prepared a coffin. She had worn mourning before he was gone. After he died, poison was found inside him. What looked like superstition revealed itself as scheduling. Hospitality had become procedure. The deaths could not be isolated anymore. Relatives, neighbors, even children were pulled into the same quiet orbit of illness and funerals. Papers spoke of 20 suspected victims. Tillie was no longer a woman with strange dreams. She became the center of what reporters called a Bluebeard circle, a domestic gravity where sickness followed her table. Yet even then, her crimes were difficult to emotionally grasp. There were no knives, no screams, only kitchens that slowly became sites of extinction. In March 1923, Tillie was convicted for Frank Kupczyk's murder. Unlike many accused women in Chicago courtrooms, she was not charming, not disarming. She was rigid, theatrical, and unyielding. She spoke in chants, declared herself untouchable by death, and predicted her own survival even as the court sentenced her to life in prison, the harshest sentence given to a woman in Cook County at that time. Her cousin, once suspected as a collaborator, was eventually acquitted. Tillie went alone into the place where routines cannot hide what kitchens once could. She died in prison in 1936. No confession came. No list was closed. Some victims remained unnamed. Some bodies never found. Some illnesses never fully explained. The neighborhood moved on. Cromwell Street and Winchester Street returned to ordinary mornings and ordinary meals. But the question did not move on. How many deaths can pass quietly before silence becomes a system? How many warnings can sound like superstition before they become a confession? And how many kitchens, still today, feel safe simply because nothing has happened there? Yet, Tillie Klimek did not teach Chicago to fear strangers. She taught something far more unsettling. She taught that danger does not need to break in. Sometimes it already has a chair at the table. Stop right there. If a woman poisoning multiple husbands with soup doesn't disturb you, the next 9 cases will. Not subscribed? Hit that button now, because what's coming proves the deadliest weapons aren't guns. They're the hands that pass you dinner. Don't miss it. Case 2, Sarah and Kolb. January 21, 2005, East Moline, Illinois. Adrienne Reynolds went out for lunch with friends. She never came home. 5 days later, parts of her body were being pulled from a state park, burned, cut apart, and hidden by the same people who had invited her into the car. Adrienne Lee Reynolds arrived in East Moline hoping to start again. 16 years old, recently relocated from Texas, she moved in with her father and stepmother and enrolled at the Black Hawk College Outreach Center to work toward her GED. She wanted structure. She wanted progress. She dreamed of joining the Marines. She liked to sing. She wanted to belong. In the alternative school environment, she met Sarah Kolb and Corey Gregory, students who already occupied social ground she had not yet earned. To Adrienne, they looked like friends. They ate together. They joked together. They shared the casual closeness that makes loneliness feel temporary. Beneath that surface, jealousy and possession were already tightening. Sarah Kolb was popular. She controlled social space. Corey Gregory orbited her. When Adrienne showed interest in Corey, Sarah reacted with hostility that did not fade. Threats were made and dismissed. Words about killing were written and laughed off. The school saw teenagers arguing. The adults saw immaturity. No one recognized escalation. What looked like adolescent drama was becoming fixation. Predator behavior does not always come from older figures. Sometimes it emerges among peers, disguised as emotional entitlement, the belief that someone else's existence threatens your control over your world. The moment that sealed the outcome looked ordinary. Sarah invited Adrienne to lunch. Corey joined them. Another friend rode along. The destination was Taco Bell. The parking lot was public. Cars moved in and out. Witnesses later described seeing movement in the vehicle. Rocking, shifting, but nothing that demanded immediate intervention. Inside the car, arguments turned physical. Corey restrained Adrienne. Sarah used a belt to strangle her and beat her with a wooden handle. Adrienne did not leave the parking lot alive. What began as a social invitation ended in silence. Afterward, the violence did not stop, it reorganized. Sarah and Corey transported Adrienne's body to Sarah's grandparents' farm in Aledo. Gasoline was poured. Fire was set. Hours passed. When burning did not erase what they had done, they recruited another teenager, Nathan Gadet. A handsaw was brought. Adrienne's head and arms were removed and placed in a garbage bag. The 3 stopped for food. Then they drove again. Parts of Adrienne's body were hidden at Black Hawk State Park. The body was divided, as if fragmentation could create distance from responsibility. Adrienne's parents reported her missing when she did not show up for work. Days passed. On January 26th, her remains were discovered. The town absorbed the shock slowly. What people had assumed was a missing teenager became a homicide. What had been social conflict became an act of dismemberment. Classrooms became quiet. Familiar places felt altered. The parking lot where nothing had seemed wrong became a crime scene in memory. The legal process struggled to absorb the emotional scale of what had happened. Sarah's first trial ended in a mistrial. Her second resulted in conviction. She received a sentence of 53 years. Corey Gregory pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 45 years. Nathan Gadet, who had dismembered the body, received a juvenile sentence, and was later released. The system separated culpability into legal categories, but the crime itself had not separated cleanly. Each person had moved at a different point along the same line of violence. In court, Sarah spoke of feeling nothing when Adrienne died. Adrienne's stepmother spoke of sleepless nights, of visions she could not erase, of a family that had been permanently broken by an afternoon that began with lunch plans. The justice system delivered sentences, but it could not return innocence to the places that lost it. A school corridor remained a school corridor. Parking lot remained a parking lot. Yet the invisible boundary between ordinary life and irreversible harm had shifted. The unresolved tension does not belong only to Adrienne's story. It belongs to every hallway where threats are dismissed as drama. Every lunch invitation that feels harmless. Every moment when someone notices something off and keeps walking. How many early warnings look too small to stop something large? And how many lives are altered forever in spaces we still call safe, simply because we are not trained to imagine what they can hide? Case 3, Marilyn Lemak. March 4, 1999, DuPage County, Illinois. 3 children were found dead in their own beds. They had been sedated. They had not fought back. And the woman who called 911 was their mother. Marilyn Lemak lived in Naperville as a nurse, a neighbor, and a mother of 3. Nicholas was 7 and loved to dress like a secret agent. Emily was 6 and spent her time drawing. Thomas was 3, described as endlessly happy. Their home was a Victorian house on a quiet street, decorated for holidays, filled with routines that suggested order. David Lemak walked the children to school. Marilyn taught Sunday school. Friends saw her crouch to meet children at eye level, organizing games on the living room floor. From the outside, this family belonged to the kind of normal that does not prepare itself for loss. Behind those routines, the marriage was dissolving. David had moved out. Divorce proceedings were underway. Marilyn had learned that he was seeing someone else. Neighbors noticed that the children were seen less often. Marilyn had begun making harassing calls. She bolted doors, removed doorbells, and began isolating herself with the children. Depression had entered her medical history. Anger began to shape her private world. The psychology of control became visible not through shouting but through withdrawal. By refusing babysitting offers, by arranging to be alone with the children, she narrowed the environment until only her version of reality remained. On March 4th, Marilyn prepared for a day with no witnesses. She called the family's cleaning lady and told her not to come. Inside the house, she sedated the children using medication prescribed to her. Nicholas was awake downstairs while Emily and Thomas were killed first. When she came back down, she told him that his siblings would not be joining them. She gave him food laced with crushed tranquilizers. Then she suffocated him as well. There was no struggle recorded. No neighbor heard screams. The house did not change shape. It simply became a place where 3 children stopped breathing. Marilyn attempted suicide afterward but survived. The next morning, she called 911 and said her children were dead. Police entered the house and found Emily in Marilyn's bed, and the boys in their own rooms. David Lemak arrived later, breaking through barricades and collapsing in grief. Red body bags were carried out while neighbors gathered in disbelief. The town searched for explanations that would allow the word accident to exist. Authorities confirmed it was homicide. The investigation revealed preparation. Medication bottles were hidden. Evidence was concealed. Prosecutors argued that the killings were an act of vengeance, a way to punish David for leaving, for choosing another life. Marilyn claimed mental illness. A jury rejected insanity. She was convicted of murder. In 2002, a judge sentenced her to life in prison without parole, stating that she would spend the rest of her days facing the question her children could never ask aloud. David Lemak spoke in court about missing bath time smells, bedtime hugs, and everyday moments that had been erased. He described dreams that would never be lived. Marilyn said nothing. The system delivered its harshest sentence. But the damage did not end with a verdict. The house remained. The school reopened. Neighbors returned to routines. Yet a deeper fracture remained, one that does not close easily. If love can become a weapon, how do we recognize when grief turns into entitlement? If silence can hide preparation, what warnings are too quiet to hear? And how many homes still feel safe simply because nothing has happened there? Yet, 3 cases in. Haven't hit like yet? Do it now. That thumbs up takes 1 second and keeps investigations this deep coming. Don't just watch, engage. Hit like and let's continue, because the next 7 get even darker. Case 4, Karen McCarran. May 13, 2006, Morton, Tazewell County, Illinois. A 3-year-old girl was found dead in her own bed. Her mother had taken her for a calming car ride. She returned alone. Karen McCarran was known as a physician, a professional trained to recognize illness and preserve life. She lived in Morton, Illinois, with her husband Paul and their daughters, Catherine and Emily. Catherine, called Katie, was 3 years old and had been diagnosed with autism in 2004. For a time, Paul and Katie lived in North Carolina so she could attend a specialized school. Karen remained in Illinois with Emily, traveling when she could. Eventually, the family decided to reunite. On May 3, 2006, Katie came home. Paul returned to North Carolina to finish a final work commitment, leaving Katie in Karen's care, along with Emily and Karen's parents. To neighbors and relatives, Karen appeared composed, quiet, deliberate. She worked that Saturday morning. She fed her daughters lunch. Emily was put down for a nap. Katie was not. Karen told her mother she would take Katie for a car ride to calm her, even though Katie did not appear distressed. It was an ordinary explanation. Nothing about it demanded resistance. Behind that calm surface lived a private pressure. Karen had become intensely focused on Katie's autism. She researched constantly. She struggled with depression. She felt responsible for the diagnosis. Over time, her world narrowed until Katie's condition became not simply an illness to manage, but a presence she believed had taken over her life. This fixation changed the way she related to her daughter, not as a child growing in her own direction, but as a problem that demanded resolution. It was the psychology of control, a slow tightening of meaning, where love no longer allowed uncertainty and difference began to feel like loss. Karen drove Katie to her parents' house nearby, knowing no one was home. She parked in the garage and closed the door. Inside, she placed a white plastic garbage bag over Katie's head and suffocated her. There were no witnesses, no raised voices, no interruption. Afterward, she carried Katie's body back to her own home, told her mother that Katie was sleeping, and placed her in bed. Then she continued her day. She sat in the kitchen and spoke quietly with her mother and brother. She went to the grocery store for ice cream. She returned to retrieve the bag she had used and disposed of it at a gas station. Later, she went upstairs, screamed, and said Katie was not breathing. Police and paramedics arrived. Karen appeared calm. She answered questions. She participated in resuscitation efforts she already knew could not succeed. Katie was pronounced dead at the hospital. That night, Paul returned from North Carolina. He and his brother had to break into the bedroom and bathroom to find Karen. She had taken an overdose of Tylenol and left a suicide note. She told Paul she had killed Katie. She told her mother the same. Over the following days, she repeated that confession to friends, family, doctors, and police. Investigators uncovered preparation. Karen had selected a location where she would be alone. She had concealed evidence. She had staged the scene to resemble natural death. She admitted she believed she could get autism out of her life. The court would later describe her actions as planned, deliberate, and coherent. Her defense argued that she was psychotic, that her depression had collapsed into delusion. The jury did not agree. She was convicted of first-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and concealment of a homicidal death. In 2008, She was sentenced to 36 years in prison, a term she must serve in full. Outside the courtroom, advocates for autistic people challenged the way the case was discussed, pushing back against narratives that framed Katie's life as a burden rather than a presence with value. They insisted on naming what had been lost, not just a child, but a person who had the right to exist as she was. Karen would say she had no words to undo what she had done. The sentence closed the case, but the questions it left behind remain unsettled. Where does care end and control begin? When love becomes obsessed with fixing, who decides what is broken, and who pays the price for that definition? And in homes where silence feels normal, how do we recognize when devotion has quietly crossed into something far more dangerous? Case 5, Nicole M. Abusharif. March 15, 2007, Villa Park, DuPage County, Illinois. A woman was found sealed inside the trunk of her own car. Was parked in her garage. The house lights were still on, and her partner was bowling. Rebecca Becky Klein was 32. She worked with adults with disabilities and was known by her family as generous, patient, and emotionally steady. 4 years she shared a life with Nicole Abusharif in a small home on Harvard Avenue in Villa Park. They renovated together. They planned futures together. To neighbors and relatives, the relationship looked settled. Unconventional perhaps, but committed. Their routines were ordinary. Their house was not marked by conflict. Nothing about their public life suggested that someone was preparing to erase the other from it. Privately, however, Nicole's emotional world had begun to split. She drank heavily. She cultivated a secret second relationship with a much younger woman she met online. She told elaborate lies about who she was, about illness, about heroism, about tragedy, creating a version of herself designed to inspire attachment and dependence. It was a predator psychology built on performance. Control through story, influence through vulnerability, secrecy through manipulation. Rebecca became the obstacle to that new narrative, a person who anchored Nicole to a life she no longer wanted to inhabit. There was also money. Life and mortgage insurance policies tied Rebecca's death to financial gain. Together, they formed a convergence, emotional replacement and material reward. Nicole did not leave. She did not confront. She reorganized her life around the removal of a person. On March 15, 2007, Rebecca was suffocated with a plastic garbage bag. Her hands and feet were bound. Her mouth was gagged. Her eyes were covered. Her body was placed inside the trunk of the couple's 1966 Ford Mustang and left in the garage. The house remained quiet. The rooms remained intact. Nothing in the environment reflected what had just occurred inside it. That night, Nicole went out. She bowled. She drank. She brought her younger lover home. They slept in the same house where Rebecca's body remained hidden. The car keys were given away as a gift. The structure of normalcy stayed in place. Doors, lights, beds, while reality sat sealed in the trunk behind them. 2 days later, after Nicole reported Rebecca missing, police discovered the body. The physical evidence spoke clearly. Her fingerprints were on the duct tape and plastic bag. Her DNA was on the bandanas. The home that had been presented as confused and searching became a preserved crime scene. Nicole lied repeatedly during the investigation about who she was with, about who she loved, about who Rebecca had been to her. Those lies delayed clarity but did not erase proof. The trial exposed a system that allowed extended freedom while evidence accumulated. Bail violations answered with more bail, containment answered with patience. The process moved slowly. Rebecca remained gone. Nicole remained free until conviction. The law eventually closed around her, but the space between harm and consequence remained wide enough for doubt to live inside it. In 2009, Nicole Abusharif was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 50 years in prison without parole. The appellate court later affirmed that sentence. The structure of justice held, but it did not resolve everything. Because one question remains unanswered. Was this a solitary act, or the visible end of a network of manipulation that reached further than one person? How many quiet rooms allowed deception to breathe before it finally turned lethal? And how many relationships still look safe from the outside while control quietly reorganizes itself inside them, waiting for a moment no one can see? Halfway through, still not subscribed? You're risking never finding content this thorough again. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications right now. The second half reveals crimes so calculated, they'll change how you see trust itself. Don't wait. Case 6 Laurie Dann. May 20th, 1988, Winnetka, Illinois. An 8-year-old boy was shot inside his classroom on the first day of summer break. The woman who pulled the trigger had once babysat in the same neighborhood. Laurie Dann lived among wealth, lawns trimmed to perfection, and hallways that smelled like floor polish and safety. She had once been a babysitter in those same neighborhoods, trusted inside kitchens and children's bedrooms. She moved between college campuses without enrolling, occupying rooms that belonged to students younger than her, passing herself off as harmless, shy, fragile. She made nuisance phone calls. She was arrested for shoplifting. She frightened former partners. She frightened doctors. And yet she remained presentable, mobile, untethered, a person who still belonged to the public world. Behind that fragile exterior was an escalating pattern of control. Dann harassed men she once dated. She left threatening calls. She mailed poisoned drinks and food across state lines. She planted arsenic-laced snacks in fraternities and homes. She obtained multiple firearms legally. She was under psychiatric care. She was prescribed lithium. She obtained experimental psychiatric medication through irregular channels. Police encountered her while she lay curled in a trash room, covered with plastic. She persuaded them she was fine. Her parents shielded her repeatedly, paying restitution, refusing to surrender her weapons, intervening with authorities. She did not fall through a single crack. She passed through many. On the morning of May 20th, she arrived at Hubbard Woods Elementary School. It was the first day of summer break. The doors were open. The hallways were quiet. In a second-grade classroom, she opened fire. 8-year-old Nicholas Corwin was killed. 5 other children were wounded. The school's silence shattered. She fled into the neighborhood. A short distance away, Laurie Dann entered the home of Philip Andrew, a college student who was home for the summer. She told his family she had been assaulted. She asked for help. She was allowed inside. When police closed in, she shot Philip Andrew point-blank in the chest. He survived. She then went into a bedroom and killed herself. In the days that followed, investigators uncovered the poison packages, the mailed juice, the tampered food, the psychiatric warnings that had stalled in professional silence, the police reports that had not crossed state lines fast enough, the FBI search that had not been coordinated in time, the commitment proceedings that were being prepared but not yet complete, the gun permits that had been legally issued to someone already known to multiple departments. The system did not fail in one place, it failed in sequence. Mental health laws required proof of immediate danger. Dann had avoided that definition just long enough. Police lacked grounds to hold her. Physicians lacked full information about her access to weapons. Parents intervened instead of restraining. Federal searches did not synchronize. The law did not move fast enough to interrupt escalation that was already in motion. The community was left with a park renamed for Nicholas Corwin. Locked school doors, armed patrols, counseling rooms filled with children who could not sleep without lights, adults who could not stop replaying hallways that once felt safe. A town that learned that violence does not always arrive as an intruder. Sometimes it arrives as someone already known. Laurie Dann's death closed the case, but it did not close the question. How many warning signs can exist before intervention becomes mandatory? How many jurisdictions can each hold a piece of danger without seeing the whole? How many parents can protect a child who is already harming others? How many systems can follow procedure while escalation quietly moves faster than paperwork? Her rampage ended in a bedroom, but the structure that allowed it did not. And somewhere else, in another town, another school, another hallway with open doors, someone else may already be drifting through the same gaps. Watched, documented, medicated, and still untouched, waiting for the moment when the system finally realizes that containment should have happened long before consequence. Case 7 Regina and Margaret DeFrancisco. June 6, 2000, Chicago, Illinois. A young man was invited into a basement by his girlfriend. He was shot in the back of the head and burned inside his own car. Oscar Velasquez was 22, a young truck driver, and for a brief 3 weeks he was Regina DeFrancisco's boyfriend. He trusted easily. He answered phone calls. He loaned money when he was told Regina needed help. He stepped into her family home in the Pilsen neighborhood believing he was walking into a private conversation, not a controlled environment. Upstairs lived 2 sisters, Regina, 17, and Margaret, 16. To the outside world, they were still teenagers, still in that space where mistakes are expected to be forgiven and futures are presumed to remain open. But inside the home, something had already shifted. Oscar had begun demanding his money back after realizing he had been deceived. Phone calls multiplied. Pressure grew. The sisters began discussing what they would do next. They reached outward, borrowing a gun from their friend Veronica Garcia. The explanation was robbery. Fear was used as justification. Control was built through preparation. Plastic was laid down in the basement. Oscar was invited back, carefully guided into a space already reorganized around what was about to happen. This was not chaos. This was containment, a predator pattern built on isolation, familiarity, and predictability. Oscar arrived because he trusted Regina. He went downstairs because he was told to. He did not know anyone else was waiting. He did not know what had been prepared beneath his feet. Margaret followed him with the gun hidden behind her back. A single shot was fired into the back of Oscar's head. He collapsed onto the plastic. He died where he stood. What followed was not panic. It was procedure. His wallet was emptied. His phone, chain, and keys were taken. The sisters split the cash. His body was wrapped, carried to his own Camaro, and driven to a vacant lot. Nail polish remover was poured over him. His body was set on fire. When an anonymous caller reported the flames, they had already moved on to the next step. They tried to sell the car. When that failed, they burned it too. When police questioned them, their stories did not match. Before charges could be filed, both sisters fled. For nearly 2 years, they lived as fugitives. They crossed state lines. They hid with relatives. Their faces appeared on Unsolved Mysteries and America's Most Wanted. Margaret altered her appearance. Regina ran until a traffic stop in Dallas turned into a high-speed chase. The arrests did not bring immediate clarity. Trials unfolded slowly. Their defense rested on self-defense. Their witness, Veronica Garcia, admitted her role in helping conceal the body in exchange for leniency. Neighbors testified to seeing the body being loaded into the Camaro. Friends testified to hearing confessions. Evidence described plastic on the basement floor before Oscar ever arrived. One jury convicted Regina. Another jury could not initially convict Margaret. One juror unable to accept that someone so young could be capable of murder. Youth almost reopened the door. Only at retrial did Margaret's conviction become final. The system hesitated where it should not have, questioned what age should never excuse. It paused over disbelief instead of behavior. Regina was sentenced to 35 years, Margaret to 46. Veronica Garcia served 5. The basement was quiet again. The plastic was gone. The house returned to normal. But the moral fracture did not. Because this was not simply a robbery gone wrong. It was a lesson in how familiarity becomes access, how youth becomes camouflage, and how belief in innocence delays intervention. It was a reminder that predators do not always look like outsiders. Sometimes they are already inside the home, already part of the routine, already trusted. And the unanswered question lingers. How many warning signs are still being dismissed as immaturity? How many dangerous decisions are being quietly rehearsed behind closed doors by people we are not trained to fear? And how many basements, bedrooms, and living rooms still hold plans that have not yet been discovered, only delayed, waiting for the next person who trusts too easily to step inside? 7 down, 3 left. Quick check. Have you liked this video? Because if you're still here without showing support, I don't get it. That like button keeps deep dives like this alive. Hit it now before we dive into the final 3. Case 8, Jacqueline Gibbons. July 29, 1982, Skokie, Illinois. A couple was beaten to death inside their own home. Their daughter had unlocked the door. Benjamin and Sybil Gibbons had waited years to become parents. When Jacqueline entered their lives, she became the center of their world. Their Skokie home was stable, paid off, carefully kept. They worked, paid their bills, carried insurance, and quietly planned a future that revolved around their daughter. Jacqueline lived with them as an adult, working as a secretary, spending money she did not have, and relying on her parents to quietly absorb her debts. From the outside, it looked like a family stretched by indulgence but still intact. Inside, Jacqueline had begun forming a different loyalty. She had met Barry Wilson while in a group home, and he quickly became a constant presence in her life, draining her finances, pressing into her routines, and slowly turning her parents into obstacles rather than anchors. The tension did not arrive all at once. It accumulated through arguments, missing jewelry, late nights, and growing fear. Sybil confided to friends that she felt something terrible was coming. Benjamin began tightening control over Jacqueline's finances. They banned Wilson from the house. They prepared to press burglary charges after a break-in they believed he committed. Each protective step felt reasonable. Each one also increased the pressure inside the house. Jacqueline had already voiced violent fantasies in the past. Now, the fantasy found a direction. Conversations with Wilson turned from complaint to calculation. The home became both the motive and the target. In July of 1982, Wilson found a willing weapon. Robert St. Pierre, newly released from prison, was recruited as the one who would carry out the killing. Jacqueline met him face to face and confirmed what he wanted to hear, that she wanted her parents dead. Money was discussed. A hammer was chosen. The house itself became the plan. Its hallways, rooms, and routines were already known. Its doors were already open. On the evening of July 29th, St. Pierre was let inside. Benjamin was beaten to death in his own kitchen with a claw hammer. His body was wrapped and placed in the bedroom. When Sybil phoned to be picked up from the train, Jacqueline drove to meet her, returned home, and walked her mother back into the house. Sybil was killed moments after stepping inside. Her last words were directed not at her attacker, but at her daughter, asking how she could do this. The bodies were wrapped in plastic and blankets. Blood-soaked carpet was cut away. A hole was carved through a closet wall to reach the garage. Benjamin and Sybil were pushed through it and placed in the trunk of their own car. Days later, their bodies were dumped in a remote area near Albuquerque, New Mexico. For a short time, Jacqueline went on with ordinary life, going to work, shopping, calling her parents' offices to report them sick, answering police inquiries with calm detachment. The house told a different story. Bloodstains, missing furniture, gloves, cleaning fluids, and a hammer hidden in the garage slowly revealed what words did not. Jacqueline eventually confessed. Wilson and St. Pierre were tracked and arrested. The bodies were found. In court, Jacqueline portrayed herself as confused, manipulated, and unintentional. The system struggled with how to place responsibility inside a family crime that looked both intimate and orchestrated. Initial convictions were overturned on procedural grounds. Years passed. In 1989, Jacqueline pleaded guilty to conspiracy and received a sentence of 60 to 80 years. St. Pierre, the hammer in hand, faced death, later commuted. Wilson was convicted as well. The legal process closed its files. The house was sold. Life in Skokie resumed. But the deeper fracture did not close. Because this case is not only about murder for hire. It is about how proximity becomes access, how dependency becomes leverage, and how the idea of family can be used as camouflage. Jacqueline did not need to stalk her victims. She lived with them. She did not need to break in. She had a key. The system responded after the violence. But the danger was already seated at the table long before police were called. And the unanswered question remains. How many homes still feel safe only because no one has yet admitted what is quietly being planned inside them? And how many people will walk through familiar doorways, trusting what they know, not realizing that the most dangerous intentions sometimes grow in the places we are least prepared to fear? Case 9, Deborah Lynn Gindorf. March 29, 1985, Zion, Illinois. 2 small children were found dead in their mother's bed. Their bottles still sat in the kitchen. Deborah Lynn Gindorf was 20 years old and living in a small apartment in Zion. Neighbors knew her as a careful young mother. Her home was clean. Her children were fed, dressed, and bathed. Christina was nearly 2, already learning words, already forming routines. Jason was only 3 months old, still moving through the soft, fragile world of infancy. Deborah watched them, babysat for neighbors, shared meals, shared stories. She had no car, no job, no phone. Her life existed almost entirely inside those walls. The building felt ordinary. Quiet hallways, closed doors, a place where routines blended into invisibility. But behind that stillness, Deborah was collapsing inward. Her marriage had ended after years of physical abuse. She was isolated from her family. After Jason's birth, her depression deepened. Neighbors saw her withdraw. Her voice grew softer. Her days became heavier. She cried more often. She spoke less. Inside her mind, something else was forming. She began hearing voices. She began believing that death was not an ending, but a passage. She wrote letters. She prepared a will. She began rehearsing the idea that leaving the world together might be safer than leaving her children behind. This was not a single moment of despair. It was a slow narrowing, a tightening of options, a mental environment where escape replaced survival. Over weeks, she began preparing. 1 box of sleeping pills was purchased and crushed days in advance. 2 more were bought the night before. She did not tell anyone what she was planning. She did not seek help. She stayed inside the apartment, inside the silence, inside the belief that she was protecting her children from a future she could no longer imagine. Just after 2 in the morning, Deborah crushed the remaining pills into powder. She mixed them into Jason's formula. She poured them into Christina's juice. She swallowed the rest herself with alcohol. The children became sick. They vomited. She placed them in bed. Then she passed out beside them. When she woke hours later, Christina and Jason were dead. She tried again to die. She turned on the gas stove and lay beneath it. She cut her wrist. She tried to smother herself. When she could not, she walked into the Zion police station and turned herself in. Officers followed her back to the apartment. They smelled gas in the hallway. They found the children in the bed. They found the letters, the will, the notes. The community did not understand what it was looking at. Neighbors described her as loving, attentive, responsible. The building was quiet again. The doors were closed again. But the apartment had become a place that could no longer be called safe. In court, experts described severe postpartum psychosis layered over depression and trauma. Others testified that she knew right from wrong. The legal system stood between illness and intention, struggling to decide where responsibility should live. In 1986, Deborah was found guilty but mentally ill and sentenced to life in prison without parole. At the time, postpartum psychosis was poorly understood. Treatment systems were thin. Screening was inconsistent. There had been no psychiatric intervention before the deaths. The illness was recognized only after the children were already gone. Years passed. Understanding changed. Doctors who once testified against her later supported clemency. Prosecutors did not object. Governors hesitated. Files sat unopened. The system that had failed to recognize her illness before the crime now struggled to decide what justice should look like after it. In 2009, her sentence was commuted. After 24 years, Deborah Jindorf walked out of prison. But the apartment remained empty in memory. The silence inside it did not leave. Because this case is not only about a mother and two children. It is about how illness can hide inside domestic routine. About how isolation becomes an incubator. About how systems that rely on appearance miss what is happening behind closed doors. No doctor saw her. No counselor entered the apartment. No alarm was raised while the plan was forming. And the unresolved question remains. How many quiet homes are still holding untreated illness inside their walls? How many mothers are being left alone with thoughts they do not recognize as dangerous? And how many doors will stay closed until after tragedy forces them open? When the silence has already taken what it was hiding. One case left. Final call. If you're still not subscribed after 9 of Illinois' most disturbing crimes, this is it. Hit subscribe. Turn on the bell. The final case involves a babysitter who drowned 3 children. Proof that trust kills. Case 10. Tiffany Hall. September 15, 2006, East St. Louis, Illinois. A pregnant woman disappeared. Her 3 children would be found days later, drowned inside their own apartment. And the person who had been trusted to babysit them was the one who had hidden their bodies. Jimella Tunstall was 23 and visibly pregnant. Her 3 children filled her small East St. Louis apartment with motion, sound, and clutter. Demond was 7, already carrying responsibility beyond his years. Ivan was 2, still learning language through imitation. Ginella was 1, learning the world through touch. Jimella relied on help. Family and friends moved in and out of her days. Tiffany Hall had been part of that world. She babysat. She was familiar. She was allowed inside. Nothing about her presence triggered alarms. The apartment doors opened to her easily. So did the routines of bedtime, meals, baths, and trust. Behind that access, something else was forming. Investigators would later say Hall had been thinking about taking Jimella's unborn baby for some time. The planning did not announce itself. It hid behind ordinary visits. It used proximity as camouflage. She already knew where Jimella slept, where the children bathed, how the apartment settled into silence at night. This was not a stranger learning a target. It was an insider already mapped inside the home. On September 15th, Hall arrived at her mother's house in East St. Louis with Jimella. Inside, Hall struck her friend repeatedly on the head with a table leg. She bound her hands and feet with duct tape. When Jimella tried to move, Hall struck her again and taped her mouth shut. She dragged her into the bathroom. In the bathtub, she cut open Jimella's womb with a scissor-like instrument and removed the 7-month fetus. Jimella bled to death. Her body was hidden, first in a container in the basement, then dragged into high weeds behind the house. Hours later, Hall summoned police to a nearby park, claiming she had just delivered a stillborn child. She refused medical examination. She presented the dead fetus. Her story shifted. She moved between versions. The doorways of hospitals, police stations, and funeral homes opened and closed around her, while Jimella's body remained undiscovered. 3 days later, Hall went to the father of Jimella's children. She said Jimella had asked her to collect the children and the vehicle. The father believed her. The last barrier fell. Back inside the apartment, the same quiet rooms, the same bathtub, Hall drowned the children one by one. Ivan and Ginella first. Then she called Demond into the bathroom, telling him it was time to take a bath. He was drowned too. Their bodies were hidden inside a washer and dryer. The apartment returned to stillness. The doors closed. The unraveling came when Hall told her boyfriend what she had done. He contacted police. Jimella's body was found. The children were found days later, hidden where no one had looked. The house, once ordinary, became a sealed crime scene. The silence was finally broken. Hall was arrested on September 21, 2006. She later pleaded guilty to all 5 killings and was sentenced in 2008 to life in prison without parole. The court avoided execution. The legal process ended. But the larger failure remained, because this was not only about violence. It was about access without scrutiny, about how caregiving relationships create blind trust, about how institutions accepted Hall's claims at face value while evidence sat just beyond closed doors. Doctors did not examine her. Police initially searched the apartment but did not open the washer or dryer. The system did not recognize the predator pattern until the damage was complete. And the unresolved question still lingers. How many trusted rooms still hide intentions no one has questioned? How many doors remain open simply because the person walking through them feels familiar? And how many lives are still moving inside quiet apartments, unaware that safety sometimes disappears long before the silence breaks? And there you have it, 10 women who proved that Illinois' greatest dangers don't announce themselves. They arrive with meal invitations, babysitting offers, and friendly smiles. A woman who poisoned 20 people with soup. Teenagers who murdered a friend in a Taco Bell parking lot. A mother who suffocated her autistic daughter. A babysitter who cut open her pregnant friend and drowned 3 children. Every single case revealed the same chilling pattern. Evil doesn't wear a mask. It wears an apron. It holds your baby. It sits across from you at dinner. It moves through your home like it belongs there. If this video made you question who you trust, good. That's survival instinct. Drop a comment and tell me which case disturbed you most. The poison in the soup? The babies hidden in a washing machine? Or the mother who killed all 3 of her children? And if you haven't already, smash that like button and subscribe, because we're just beginning to uncover how monsters hide in America's kitchens. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay cautious, and remember, the deadliest threats don't break down doors. They're already holding the keys.